The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Hi everyone and welcome to the Echo Chamber. I'm Maja Pawinska Sims, the EMEA editor of the Holmes Report, and I'm joined today by our CEO and editor-in-chief Arun Sudhaman, our man on the ground in Hong Kong. Hi Arun, how are you today?
I'm very well, Maja. It's a Friday,
Yay.
So that's good. How are you?
I'm okay, I'm very glad it's Friday. #Fry-yay, as they say on the Twitter.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the Hong Kong leadership's attempts to try and find a PR agency to sort out its reputation in the light of, months now of unrest in the city. This is a huge story you broke last week, which has since been picked up by the mainstream media around the world, including the BBC. So the Information Services Department approached apparently a number of PR agencies with a reputation management campaign brief, and everybody turned it down. What was in that brief?
Well, I can tell you exactly what was in the brief because, as you know, we have the brief.
We have the brief.
It's 72 pages long.
Wow.
And as far as I can tell, only 2 of the 72 pages carry any actual information on the public relations assignment and what's required.
What's the rest of
The
it?
other 70 pages seems to be stuff like, you know, that stuff you see in contracts where it's like, this is what this word means.
The legal speak.
The legal stuff. There's a lot of legal stuff. I mean, you get this in a lot of briefs, but I've never seen anything like this, like a 2 out of 72 page ratio of signal to noise. So it's like 1 out of 41.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, not 1 out of 41, 1 out of 36 even. But that's just... Yeah, I mean, and maybe that says something about the Hong Kong government. But what's in the brief is a sort of description of the challenge Hong Kong is facing, which they call background, which I thought was interesting because I would say it's foreground, but anyway.
Yeah.
It says that protests have attracted widespread international attention. Hong Kong's image has been affected locally and abroad. Governance and the implementation of one country, two systems has come under the spotlight. It talks about the concerns to Hong Kong's positioning as a global business and financial hub with a stable environment underpinned by the rule of law. And then it says there's a more acute concern is the effect the protests may have on perceptions about personal safety for business travelers, trade shows, exhibitions and tourists.
Okay.
So that's the background. It has 2 objectives: address negative perceptions in key markets overseas to maintain confidence in Hong Kong, and underscore the strengths and attributes that differentiate Hong Kong from other cities in the region and bring out the success of one country, two systems. And then there's some stuff on target audiences, scope of services, key markets, date of service delivery. So they wanted the campaign to start, I think, at the end of the year. By the end of the year, fourth quarter. When I say third or fourth quarter, but the turnaround timings are interesting because the briefing. So this document came out. Then there was an in-person briefing 8 days later, and they wanted proposals sent in a week after that, after the in-person briefing. So
that's quite a short turnaround.
Yeah, but it's not like it was Christmas. So I don't think the PR industry should be complaining.
So far, this is like, fairly standard reputation management campaign brief. Why has everyone turned it down? Why is this so toxic?
Because it's Hong Kong and it's the Hong Kong government, and it's extremely tricky for agencies right now. And I think probably the best way to describe it is that it's an assignment that for global PR firms at least is more trouble than it's worth. And if we start at the end of that phrase, how much is it worth? I mean, budgets are a concern. At least one of the agency heads involved has mentioned that to me. I don't know if budgets were actually discussed at the in-person briefing, but I think there was a concern over that. But even notwithstanding budgets, I think the level of trouble associated with this kind of assignment would have made it very difficult to handle unless budgets were really, really, astronomical. So 8 firms got the brief. I think 5 turned it down off the bat. 3 went to the briefing. 1 dropped out right after the briefing. And then 2 more never submitted quotes. And we know the 3 that went to the briefing were Ruda Finn, Ogilvy, and Brunswick.
And what sort of responses, you've spoken to almost all the agency heads, I think, involved in the initial briefing. What sort of responses have you been getting off the record from them?
So in terms of why they turned it down, and why, this assignment is perceived as being more difficult than it's worth, I think you have to start with the concerns around employee activism, something that you and I have discussed before at length, both in the context of Hong Kong and in the context of other kind of controversial assignments. I think Ogilvy and the Customs and Border Protection, Edelman and Geo Group. Most of these global PR firms, if not, well, all of these global PR firms are largely comprised of young Hong Kong employees, many of whom are the kind of core demographic for these protests. I was at an agency event yesterday, and 2 agencies were there, and I asked them, and they said they don't really know for sure, but they're pretty sure that most of their staff are out protesting. So,
right, okay.
That's difficult to manage if you're working for a client that your employee base is so at odds with, and would take a very dim view of. So I think that's the number one concern. I think, secondly, clients would ask questions about your judgment in taking on an assignment like this. It attracts attention. It's the kind of attention that agencies just hate. We've seen this with Ketchum and Russia. We saw it with Edelman and the oil lobby. We've seen it with Bell Pottinger and numerous instances, although Bell Pottinger didn't ever seem to dislike the attention, at least when Lord Bell was in charge. But certainly for clients of a particular agency, they would take a dim view of being grouped in with an agency that maybe was taking on a controversial assignment. The presence of Beijing is also a thorny topic. An assignment of this nature, which is attempting to bring out the success of one country, 2 systems, would certainly attract attention in the ultimate corridors of power. And all of these global PR firms, we can't forget, have extensive interests on the mainland, in Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen. And if this campaign were to unfold in a less than positive fashion, or if things didn't go swimmingly, which is very, I think a very high possibility outcome, it might impact an agency's activities, in those Chinese cities as well.
Is there an ethical? You haven't mentioned ethics here. I mean, we're in the post-Bell Pottinger era of public relations. We are led to believe, where everybody's much more concerned about acting in a way that is ethical in terms of all those things you've just discussed. Is there anyone out there who would take? Is that true? Are there firms who would take this on if it wasn't seen to be such a hassle for them?
Yeah. I think there are loads. I think there are loads of firms, not loads maybe, but I think there are firms who are probably contacting the ISD as we speak.
I would totally agree with you, actually. I've had at least one WhatsApp this week from somebody saying I'd take that on.
Oh, really? Okay,
it's not...
Yeah, no, me too. I just had one earlier today from someone. And those may be firms that don't have an office in Hong Kong or operations in China. Now, it's a really interesting question you ask, because obviously, we are told repeatedly that ethical considerations now suddenly reign supreme in this kind of brave new sunlit upland that we're living in. And there's 2 elements to this, I think. The first is that, yes, I think there were concerns, so beyond these sort of considerations around employees and clients and operations, I think the brief raised some serious misgivings about whether this would actually substantively address Hong Kong's problems.
Yeah.
You know, I think you can certainly make the case that good public relations can help here, because it would help the Hong Kong government understand its stakeholders better, rebuild relationships, rebuild trust, and that will help deliver better policy. And that is always, I think, as something, you know, that Paul Holmes has written about at length, that has always got to be the kind of ultimate goal for public relations. But this brief doesn't suggest that any of that is the case. It actually looks like the kind of proverbial putting lipstick on a pig type of situation.
Love that expression. It's really interesting, isn't it, that there's a huge difference, which is, you know, painfully clear here, between a PR campaign that is effectively requiring some the dark arts of spin, and genuine listening to expert counsel quietly and acting on that. There's a huge difference, and this campaign is that, you know, this brief is definitely the former rather than the latter. Absolutely.
I don't know if I'd go as far as to call this dark arts necessarily. I mean, I don't think they're going to be setting up fake Wikipedia pages.
Never know.
Necessarily, but it's certainly the kind of campaign that makes you think, actually, so what they want to do is demonstrate that everything in Hong Kong is great, and that one country and two systems is a success. And neither of those things is true. And as you know, any good public relations strategy is only as good as the facts on the ground.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of being asked to act in opposition to the facts. If you can actually consult in a way that changes the facts on the ground, that's a different situation. But, you know, as more than one agency said to me, there's nothing in the brief that suggests you're going to have high-level strategic access to the people that matter. You're going to be working with a client that is already caught between, you know, a range of masters, let's say. And I think there's also a view, which I'm not sure I totally agree with, but there's certainly a view among some of the agencies that this is not a PR problem. This is a political problem or a policy problem. I have always had issues with that kind of formulation, because I don't think I've ever seen a situation, whether it's business or political, that couldn't benefit from good public relations advice.
Yeah. But there doesn't seem to be any guarantee that advice is what's required here.
Right, exactly. And that's the problem. But I do think when I see a lot of PR people and comms people saying that, using that formulation, this is not a PR problem, it's almost like they're trying to divulge themselves for responsibility for, you know, things that might actually matter, which may be a little harsh, but... you know, I just think PR people should be trying, I think, to make a difference on the biggest issues, rather than necessarily just saying, okay, this is not our problem.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. But it's about I mean, there's clearly a sense that the level of influence you'd actually have in this case.
Influence, timings, budgets, employees, clients, and the scope of the brief, I think, are all conspire to kind of create that conclusion. And it's really difficult to disagree with that conclusion. And in that kind of situation, you can't deliver the kind of robust, sophisticated public relations advice that could actually shift policy and change reputation. And then the other point I wanted to make, just going back to your question about ethics, I mean, what are ethics really? You know, these are all pragmatic considerations. But, you know, that kind of, to me, that is what ethics is.
Well, it's really doing the right thing, isn't it? It's having a sense that you're not being the bad guy in this situation.
Right. But but people do the right thing because there's a cost to doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, that's a very cynical but true, isn't it? But the cost, I think it's more than that. Ethics is more than it's more than a transactional consideration, isn't it? It's that it's kind of a bit more bone deep than that, I think, isn't it? That you know that this is maybe a situation where you're not going to be even if you're doing your best work, you're not going to be able to affect things that are good on a societal or community or political level. It feels a bit like you're not going to have Carrie Lam's ear here. This is not going to change policy. But that's a cost, is it not?
I mean, I think, you treat people well, I think, because there's a cost to not doing so, to them and ultimately to you as well. I mean, I don't know. I think these are pragmatic considerations, but I think that is kind of what adds up to what we describe as ethics. Maybe that is a bit cynical. I don't know. But if you're asking me whether agencies are more motivated by altruism than by pragmatism, I would always go for the latter.
Well, particularly when you're talking about big global agencies, the cost of getting this wrong and being exposed as having been involved in something that does unfold in a negative way it's just too much, isn't it? The sums, however you're measuring it, the sums do not add up, whether in human terms or financial terms or reputational terms, and also in terms of the perception of the PR industry as well.
But no one cares about that.
Do they not really?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think any agency turns down an assignment because they're worried about the reputation of the industry. They're worried about their own reputation, and they're worried about the reputation of their agency, I think.
Just look at.
But do you really think that they worry about? I mean, I think there are many agencies out there that would be quite happy to be seen as more ethical than the rest of the industry.
Yeah, but I think individual agencies are concerned about the reputation of the business. I mean, there's so much navel gazing goes on, which we've discussed at length about how PR is seen and how PR itself is perceived. I mean, it's quite circular. I'm not saying that's a consideration in this specific case, but I do think individual agencies are concerned about the perceptions of the business they operate.
I'm not convinced. I actually think it's a benefit to agency X if the industry is seen as being as less ethical as they are.
Well, yeah, because there was a lot of crowing over Bell Pottinger, wasn't there? Really, I mean, for all that, the industry is much more ethical than that. It was kind of competitive ethics. Let's just rewind a bit into. We're talking about reputation and look at the issues the Hong Kong leadership is facing. I mean, they've outlined in terms of their global brand image, if you like. I mean, they've outlined in two very short sentences that in the brief that this is partly driven by worries about perceptions of Hong Kong outside the city. What other issues? I mean, you're there on the ground. What do you think the issues are with Hong Kong's reputation now on the global stage?
Well, it's suffering, let's say. I think anytime you have these images, alarming images of fires breaking out across the city, there's been definitely an uptick in levels of violence, protesters lobbing Molotov cocktails, videos of police brutality. Hong Kong's reputation is taken a battering, I think you'd have to say, and the numbers bear it out. I mean, the August visitor arrivals, I think, were down 12%. Cathay Pacific's, that's the overall city. Cathay Pacific alone was down 38%.
Ouch.
There's a lot of stats about how various businesses in the city are suffering, many of which are dependent on tourism and business tourism. And Hong Kong's reputation, as we've talked about before, is built around, being this global business hub.
Yeah.
Which actually the brief, I think, describes really well. And so, understandably, the government is very worried about that. But they're looking at it the wrong way around, aren't they? They seem to think they can fix the reputation by coming up with a sort of campaign to reassure, businesses overseas and investors and so on.
Yeah.
When actually the only way to fix a reputation is to address the underlying problems.
Yeah.
But it's a real problem for Hong Kong. There's no question. It's going to require, as one of the people I spoke to, one of the agency heads, familiar with the situation,
as we say,
said that the reputation damage from this is almost existential, and will require a fundamental relaunch, reboot, and rebrand. And I think that's true, but the reputation damage is a result of the sort of wanton negligence that has characterized Hong Kong's leadership for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's not accidental. It's not unfortunate that somehow its reputation has kind of slipped. It's as a result of actions that have been taken or not taken.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, again, those sort of fundamental elements of Hong Kong's reputation, which you would say are its tireless entrepreneurial workforce, world-class infrastructure, rule of law, and its enviable location in the Pearl River Delta, each of those has kind of eroded and been undermined over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years. And so those all need to be addressed if the city is serious about rebuilding its global reputation.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a competitive sport, nation branding. So, whilst Hong Kong declines, that means that businesses will look elsewhere. I mean, is it a zero-sum game? I'm not sure, but it's definitely competitive.
So who's benefiting from Hong Kong's reputation taking such a battering? Is Singapore the primary beneficiary here?
Yes, I think Singapore is the as you put it, the primary beneficiary, and they have the benefit of vision, a kind of political vision that Hong Kong lacks. But then, I think other Asian cities are also benefiting. I think for different reasons, actually. I think Shanghai has definitely benefited. I think Taipei is benefiting as well.
In what way? I don't know those two cities. How are they benefiting?
Well, they're just becoming a much more attractive hub for businesses. And yeah, I don't want to get too into the weeds in terms of what each of them offers and represents, but they are now credible alternatives, I think, to Hong Kong. I mean, let's be fair to Hong Kong. It still has the second or third biggest stock market in the world, depending on how you measure it. It is still one of the global economic centers, still one of the top choices for where people want to put their money and invest their money. And it is still headquarters for a lot of businesses. And that hasn't really changed yet. The declines we've seen have all been, I guess, to areas where you would see a decline first: tourism, and retail. If anything were to happen to things like the stock market, or in terms of businesses moving out of the city, then you would really know that Hong Kong is starting to suffer.
Do you think things will get worse? Have we reached rock bottom yet?
No, I don't think we've reached rock bottom. I mean, I don't know ultimately, but I don't think anyone knows. But for all of us here, I don't think any of us feel like we've hit rock bottom and we're on the way back.
Yeah.
It's just really difficult to say. But with National Day approaching in a couple of weeks, I think, or maybe even less than that, you can certainly see things getting worse.
Do you think it must be so weird living living through this and seeing firsthand how that shift in something as kind of intangible as reputation is manifesting itself on the ground and changing things in the city itself?
It's very interesting to live through it. I always wonder whether our view here is somewhat warped because we are living through it. Or is it more realistic? Because, I sometimes wonder if the view globally, externally, is warped. But then, perception is reality. So whatever people think of Hong Kong is kind of what Hong Kong's reputation is right now.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And, everyone is cancelling travel. Trevor Noah cancelled. And Matilda, the musical, cancelled, which is very disappointing.
Oh, I bet you're devastated about that.
And, I'm hearing about agencies, just as one type of business, talking about moving their staff out, maybe to Singapore for a while. So you're starting to see all these kind of contingency plans come into play. Lots of people in Hong Kong would tell you all of that is just alarmist and out of proportion. But, you can't, I just don't think you can second guess perceptions that people have necessarily.
So if Carrie Lam called you this afternoon and said, she's got your cell phone number and she says, Arun, what do I need to do? What advice would you give her?
I'm fairly sure she'd strongly condemn me first.
But she's listening. She really wants to know what advice you're going to give her.
She's listening. She has a dialogue platform. I don't know, when is the dialogue platform? It's taking place at a big stadium, but only 150 people will be there. What would I say? I would say she has to be serious about listening to every stakeholder group in Hong Kong and taking all of their views as seriously as they each deserve, and not treating them with disproportionate importance. So not putting the concerns of the business elite, for example, above those of the Hong Kong working classes or middle classes. And she has to be serious about listening to them, taking their views and thoughts and concerns on board, and then actually building a genuine plan that addresses all of these concerns.
Is any of that going to happen, do you think? What happens next?
No, I don't think any of that will happen. I mean, I think, look, let's be a little bit charitable towards our beleaguered leader.
Don't tell me you're starting to feel sorry for her. Don't believe that for a second.
No, I would definitely not say that on a podcast. I do feel a bit sorry for the ISD, by the way, because I think they are really stuck in a difficult situation, and they are probably more used to, fire safety campaigns and things like that.
Yeah, maybe a bit out of their depth here.
Yeah, but I suppose this is part of the job description, isn't it? You just don't think it's ever going to happen. Back to Carrie Lam, this plan to meet with 150 randomly selected citizens for community dialogue is a good plan. I mean, it's better than nothing. It's better than not listening, and it's better than just condemning everyone. But the breakdown in trust is so profound here that no one believes it's a genuine attempt to get to the root cause of Hong Kong's problems and to actually diffuse the unrest that has gripped this city. And for that, unfortunately, Carrie Lam and her government have to take the lion's share, if not all of the blame, because they have essentially, created this situation where trust has broken down.
Yeah, and rebuilding that is not going to happen with a 72-page legal document, is it?
No, but at least she gets to play Queen Elizabeth Stadium. So.
Yeah, true. I mean, you'd love to do that.
I'd like more than 150 people.
Yeah, please let there be. Please let it be a full stadium when you finally do your big gig.
Yeah, it will be.
So just finally, finally, as I said at the beginning, the story's been picked up around the world, including you doing your bit representing the Holmes Report on the BBC, which was pretty cool. Do you prefer asking the questions or being a pundit? What's it like being on the other end?
I want to ask you, actually, have you ever had a situation where you've been interviewed in any...
I've been on the radio. I used to be like one of the Jeremy Vine show's regular pundits.
Oh, wow.
But then I used to sit on the fence too much, which would not surprise you in the slightest. I wasn't extreme enough in any of my views, so they cancelled me. But no, I have done a bit of radio, but not TV.
Yeah, I don't mind being interviewed in general, actually, because you know this as well as anyone. When you're asking the questions, you do have to do research. When you're answering them, I don't know, it definitely feels like it's less hard work. But having said that, you certainly can't, I don't think you can treat a BBC interview in that kind of cavalier manner. So I did prepare myself. I don't remember anything about it. It's all a blur. It was nerve-wracking. It's my first time on TV, and I mean, I will be surprised if it happens again, so probably my last. And yeah, I suppose overall I'd have to say I prefer asking the questions.
Yeah. You did a good job though. Well, I thought you did a good job because you were very calm and measured in the way that you answered everything, and you clearly had done your prep. But yes, I think that kind of, I'm too much of a control freak to kind of be on the receiving end of questions that I might not have absolute control over. So I much prefer asking questions and kind of driving things. But I thought you did a great job.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was quite lucky in that working in this industry, there were people I could ask beforehand for advice.
Yes, there is that. We are surrounded by media relations and media training experts, aren't we?
There was no shortage of advice.
I'm sure.
And actually, it was very good advice. And so I think I should definitely shout out Matt Cartmel and Richard Fogg, who both helped a lot.
Shout out to Cartmel and Foggy. Well done, guys. Yeah. You prepped him well for the job. Right, well, I'm going to
they appear to know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing. It's reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was I don't know if I'd say it was a surprise, but it was reaffirming, reassuring.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Well, knowing them both extremely well, I can see that might have been a surprise. I'm going to let you go because obviously Carrie's on the other line. Desperate for your counsel. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's lovely to chat through, and obviously no end in sight for this, so I'm sure we'll talk again.
All right, cool. Thanks, Maya.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.